Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. And lucky me, you've always heard me say that chefs and architects are my celebrities. And I know that sounds so goofy, but I am here today with Brent Kendle, Mark Candelaria, and CP Drewett, three architectural idols of mine. Yes, one could call them iconic, but we are doing today what I'd like to call an architect's roundtable. And this is going to turn into some content for our first ever Iconic Home issue, which we're really excited about. But today I want you to just sit back and relax and enjoy hearing from three brilliant minds in architecture right here. So guys, so great to have all three of you in the room together.
It's great to be here. Thanks for putting it together, and I'm glad to have everyone here with us.
It's very nice to be hosted by you. This is beautiful. Great to be here.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Renee. I really appreciate it. This is great.
Well, and so we are in the office of Drewett Works, and we're enjoying a little bit of wine and some great conversation. And one of the things I just want to share with all the listeners is some great camaraderie. In this community, I don't feel like architects are competitive. They're more, there's more camaraderie than anything. And obviously, everybody's working to do amazing work. But I'm excited to hear from all three of you today. So I want to kick off this podcast and go back to the very beginning. And Brent, why don't we start with you? How did you find architecture, or did architecture find you?
It probably kind of found me when I was, young, a child. I was always very artistic. I always drew a lot. My mother was a designer. I always wanted to be an architect, but didn't become one. I grew up in a custom designed home that my parents designed, but I didn't really, that's all I knew, so that's all I thought about. And when I was about 10 years old, my mother opened a Frank Lloyd Wright book that she had when she was in college. And honestly, about the third or fourth page into that book, I kind of knew what I was going to do. And, I had the fortune of growing up outside of Chicago, so being interested in architecture in general and Frank Lloyd Wright in particular, I was a few miles away from Oak Park and River Forest and all that. And so spent a lot of time up in Wisconsin looking around for Frank Lloyd Wright work and so forth. So, yeah, I guess it kind of found me.
Well, and you still do that today. So you're on wasn't it just last summer that you were on Frank Lloyd Wright hunting grounds in Wisconsin?
No, whenever I get a chance, I'd love to see something. Actually, last summer, I finished one of my bucket list items, and that was finally seeing falling water back in Pennsylvania, which, if you have any interest in architecture at all, if you haven't seen that home, you need to see it. It's the equivalent of the Taj Mahal. It's one of the greatest pieces of architecture ever done. And fortunately, there's also two other amazing Frank Lloyd Wrights within a stone throw of there that are equally brilliant. So it's definitely worth a trip.
Yeah, awesome. Mark, did architecture find you, or did you find architecture?
Not really sure. I think Legos and Lincoln Logs found me, and then that kind of just took off from there. I've told this story many times. My mom used to drag us to model homes, my brother and I. My brother became an attorney, so that tells you how this whole thing went. But we'd go look at model homes, and then I'd come home and build it out of my Legos and Lincoln Logs, and then we had this big field behind our house, and I'd parcel off the field and sell lots. And so I had my shtick down at a really early age, and every time the relatives would come into town, I'd sell them another set of plans. And next time they came, I had renderings, and I don't know where I learned it all, but I think it was from the salespeople at the model homes. That's exactly where I learned it. So that's where it found me that way.
CP, what about you? Did architecture find you, or did you find architecture?
I think architecture found me. I grew up a military brat, and we were moving every 2 years, so I think my father and I were the original fix and flippers. We seldom did the family ever get a chance to see where we were moving. So Dad would go to the new location, buy a house, and then we would pull up in front of it, usually at night. And then we got to see where we were living the next morning. But it was always the worst home and as best of an area that he could muster. But we'd make the most of it. But Dad and I built furniture. And it was just the little things, whether it was a bookshelf or we built a sofa one time with integrated lighting. And he sort of taught me the art of thinking and details, and that just kind of became part of my DNA.
I love it. I mean, so at an early age, design was something that was impacting all of you. And then, of course, today you're designing at least 150 hours a week at this point, right? So, I've done so many stories in my career and podcasts and interviews and things like that on why to hire an architect and how to hire an architect. But I've got a question for the three of you, and that is, why today is it more important than ever, given the scale and the enormity of some of these projects? Why is it more important than ever to have an architect on your job?
Well, I'll start with that one. I mean, that's one of our big things with the ARA group, and why we formed it actually was because there's so many people out there that are designing homes that aren't qualified technically. I think an architect, really brings a whole nother dimension to producing a set of plans. Producing a set of plans is like, 1/8 of the whole thing, don't you think? I mean, it's so much more than just, here's your plans. And I was just reading the document there from or the magazine with George's interview, and that's virtually what he was saying. So, and to be with these guys here that are sitting around the table, I mean, what we do and what we bring to the whole experience of designing a house is so monumental compared to just, printing out a set of plans.
There's a lot of reasons to hire an architect in my opinion. I think one of them is there's just a myriad of decisions that have to be made. And I think that building a custom home can be just overwhelming and intimidating to a lot of people. And a good architect is going to help make that journey, and it is a journey, a lot more enjoyable. And I think, the architect tends to usually also become the quarterback of the team. I mean, typically we're collaborating with interior designers and landscape architects and builders and helping select builders and it's just there's an awful lot that that an architect brings to the table. Then of course there's just the level of detail that goes into things. I mean, there's a lot of people that can draw up a pretty looking or a handsome looking home in renderings or from a distance. It's kind of Mies van der Rohe said, the God is in the details. And I think a well-designed home by an architect, you'll see it in every detail in the home.
And one other thing we were talking about before we started the podcast is just the complexity now of designing a house in terms of the bureaucracy that we have to go through to get a permit. I mean, it's constantly changing, and there's so much that we know as architects that the average Joe Blow on the street doesn't even have a clue what's going on some of these things. It's gotten very, very complicated, and it really takes an expert to make your way through that whole process.
Yeah, I think everyone needs sound leadership and stewardship and kindness and compassion and firmness. And we have to wear so many different hats, and the only way that we can really conjure up the skill set is through a lineage of information that gets passed on through the craft. Every single one of us at this table have volumes of people that have made impressions on us through our lives. And not to say that someone that's not necessarily an architect hasn't had experiences, but there's something that is extremely different in the leadership and the focus that we have and what we've had to go through to get to this point. I mean, there's just the layers of school and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a really good point, CP, in that, I've noticed in my career now, 40 plus years, just the database of not only details and the knowledge you have, but the experiences you have. And, when you see things coming down or coming at you, you go, okay, I know where this goes. And you have that to draw on. It's my perspective has changed tremendously, especially in the last even 10 years, just having that reservoir of data and experiences.
So I want to just add to that. I also feel like an architect helps make a house feel like a home. I've had the experience of going through, homes that are for sale, real estate agents are listing a home or whatever. And you walk down a hallway and you don't know why, but it just feels just oddly not just quite right? It's maybe just a little too small, or you see something where it feels like it's just a little oddly too big, or it just doesn't feel good. and there's like an imbalance of proportion or scale that is a subtle thing. I'm not an architect, but I've been through so many of your beautiful homes, and so you've trained me to feel what it feels like to be in a home that is well designed. And so now I feel like I can feel like I can feel it, if it's not well designed.
Well, it does, and I was going to say, especially with my colleagues that are here, I think one thing that a good architect, and I think everyone here strives to do, is create a home. Like you said, it's not just a house; it's a home. It's livable. I mean, the things that we do, we try to bring as much art and craft and sculpt a home, and that's all very important, that it looks beautiful. But bottom line is, it has to be, it has to live beautifully. And I think, I've toured, both these guys' homes. You see them in the magazines, and you're really impressed with, those wow pictures and all that. But then when you get inside them, you go, wow. The lighting is perfect. The scale of the room is just right. All those things make a difference. It has to be more than just looking good on paper or looking good in a picture. And I think when you hire somebody maybe that's not as skilled as an architect, they may be putting a lot of pictures together, but they don't assemble, the whole is not better than the parts.
They're choreographed together.
Right.
I think I've grown to appreciate the artistry and understanding what are the right questions to ask, because it looks like on the outside we're supposed to know everything. We do need to know a lot about many different topics, but don't we need to just be resourceful and the attention to that resourcefulness, and then sort of having that innate sense of where to find the information. And because every project's different, they all have a little different aspect to them, and we grow.
Yeah, and every client's different. That's the big thing, is just, you have to tap into the soul of your client. And
you learn them.
And you learn them. And then your job is to extract what's going to, respond to their feelings and their soul and capture it in architecture. It's like writing a song. It's the same thing. It's just our songs don't move and they don't play, but they're there forever. And you want to capture that spirit in bricks and concrete, right?
Well, I think the other thing is also, I think all of us have some personal and emotional skin in the game when we take on a client, when we design a home. And so we become that champion for the client. So you mentioned the red tape and stuff that you go through to get through the city, and some of those frustrating moments, maybe you need a variance or something like that. We're the champions for the client. First of all, we keep them focused and we let them know it's going to be okay. I mean, we don't just do this for a fee. It becomes more than that. And so we are our clients, champions to make sure that this house is going to get built. You are going to live in this house, and wake up every day and be happy that you went through the process.
Yeah, totally.
I love that. So, CP, you mentioned that there are volumes of people who've made impressions on all of you. And so I just want to tap right into that question and ask you first, who are some of the people who've made an impression upon you? And I want to hear from all three of you on this.
I'm on the spot. I'll do better. I'll do better as this evolves. But my father had a huge impression upon me, and I grew up working in the trades. So I framed, I laid block, I pulled wire, I bent conduit, I dug trenches. My dad always made me work a job. I actually enjoyed it, but so those people that I sweat and labored beside, I couldn't recall all their names, but those souls really made huge impressions upon me, because I gained the exposure on the how to get things done, and that's always been a part of my thinking process.
I mean, for me, it was having the privilege and the opportunity to work with George Christensen for 18 years, who was my mentor and then partner. And what I learned, I learned design from George quite a bit, but what I really learned the most from George was how to handle a client. He was a master. I mean, we'd see him bumble through disasters where clients were just yelling at him and just, it was like, oh my God, we're like, I hope he gets out of this okay. And he would miraculously turn the whole thing around. And by the end, they were having dinner and scotch with George. And he was just one of those guys that was just, he would never give up, and he would never lose his temper, or he always was in control. Even in the worst moments, he was calm and collective and always had a sense of humor to the situation, which sometimes drove the clients crazy, but he would just outlast them. And that's one of the things I learned, is just never give up and just stay confident, stay positive, and keep going.
I think that's you, Mark, by the way.
Well, humor is a big trick shot because it's so emotional. Not to get off topic, Renee, but humor, if you don't bring some levity to this, because it's so emotionally packed, and humor sort of it breaks down the human spirit. It helps people. It unifies. I don't know. It just really, it can settle the playing field sometimes.
Totally agree.
I have a lot of different influences. Certainly a lot of different architects have influenced me over the years. You mentioned one before the start of the podcast, Gordy Rogers. I always really appreciated. I mean, he was an architect's architect. I think I just always admired people that just have, integrity and so forth. But I would say probably as a practice, I was really fortunate. My first project was our monk shadow home that we did for a client. I'll go ahead and name him Jeff Schoon because he'd appreciate that. But Jeff had such a love for life and such an appreciation, had been on the property for 10 years, grew up in a house designed by, I'm going to forget his name. It's a oh gosh, I'm going to forget it. Anyways, but just a great guy, and just a love for the site, love for the process, just made it really fun. That's where I really got to realize that residential architecture is it can be, and it should be so much fun. If it's not fun, you should do something else. And it just made it a joy for me. And I realized that's the kind of thing I wanted to do. Those are the kind of clients I wanted to, have, and been really fortunate. 20 years later, we still have clients like that, so it's great.
Yeah. So right now, I'm sitting in a position where I often am. So just to kind of play it out for everybody who's listening. So I'm sitting across the table from Brett and Mark, and behind both of them are 3 beautiful renderings in CP's office. Now, when I'm in Mark's office, I'll be talking to Mark at his conference table, and there's this TV screen behind him, and the images are going by. And so my eyes quickly always are like, looking at the pictures behind you. And Brett, the same thing happens. And so I'm like, here I am again. And what happens for me every time when I'm with all 3 of you is that, and here we've got a screen with more amazing beauty coming up here. So we've talked a lot about the clients, we've talked about how people live, but, I'm always wowed by the artistry of what's happening. So what's happening is you're melding how people are living, but also thinking of innovative ideas and, really incredible design, like jaw-dropping design. And so I'm also at the same time looking at both of you, looking over your shoulders at these renderings. And let's talk a little bit about the artistry of the craft, because when we think about some of the homes that are being designed today, I am wowed on a regular basis.
Well, I think one of my biggest concerns right now is in fact the artistry and the craftsmanship. And one of my big missions is to get more and more kids involved, like you were, CP, in framing, in the crafts, in things like the art. They don't even teach these things in school. I learned drafting in high school, in Votech school. They don't even teach that anymore, And so I look at a lot of these kids coming out of high school that a lot of them don't need to be going to college. Some of them probably can't even afford to go to college. But you know what? They could get great jobs as electricians, as framers. How many jobs right now are they looking for good people?
Oh my gosh, it's endless.
And how much money do these guys make?
And I think all our young people are programmed to, I have to go to college, and it's not for everyone. And in the game of life, I've played it. I always go down the non-college route when I'm playing that game just to see what happens. But it's truly remarkable to be a journeyman or to be someone that is a benchman in a mill shop. Alan Rosenthal was kind enough to give my team a tour, and I mean, third generation mill worker, and then to walk through those hallowed halls and see those men and women doing their job and their craft. They're as good as what they do, more so often sometimes than we are, you know. And the artistry and the respect of the desert. And I'm rambling, but I do think that our community has taken a really important shift within, you'll argue, maybe the last 10 years, that we flipped from a developer state or a developer city to something that was much more architecturally driven. And I feel like architecture has got really the front row now, and it's exciting.
Well, you've heard me say this before. I feel like we are in a renaissance here in Phoenix, especially in residential design and building. And we're so lucky, the three of us and other architects practicing what we do, to be here right now. I graduated in 1983 and back from ASU. And back then, I couldn't wait to get out of here. I mean, I loved the palm trees. I loved the shorts and the flip-flops and the convertibles. And I loved all that. But as an architect who craved great architecture, it wasn't happening here. I mean, the Frank Lloyd Wrights were gone. There was a few of the mid-century modern architects that were left. But most people just wanted to kind of go build a point resort and make as much money as they could and then retire to La Jolla. So there wasn't an investment in this community like there is now. Now we have people, I bet, between the three of us, I bet 50% or more of our clients are from out of state or have moved here from out of state. They're bringing a different sense of kind of values for good design, architecture, and craft. So they're much more demanding on us. They're much more demanding on their interior designers, and they're much more demanding on the general contractors and craftsmen that are out there. So people like Alan and his shop, who is, literally the best of the best of the best at what they do, they're here in Phoenix. They're not in Los Angeles. They're not in New York. They're right here, and they're doing work worldwide. And we have the ability to actually pick up the phone or just go talk to them or see them at an ARA function and have them working on our project. I mean, it literally is like the Renaissance. We've got our own, Michelangelos and people to pick from. So we're in a very good spot right now.
I mean, I think it's what you said. I kind of came in this whole field in '82, and it was kind of the Monterey homes. Not to pick on anybody, it was just get it done and get it built and move in. And
I worked for them.
Put the single pane windows in and be done, or Gosnell. It's like what you said there. And I think what CP said is exactly right. I mean, I think the appreciation for architecture and good design has completely changed in the last 10 years, like you said. Yeah. And it's only gotten more and more. And I think it has a lot to do with publications like yours, Iconic, HGTV, despite everyone thinking you can build a house in four days, But I think there's just a greater awareness of the value of good design and living in something that's well designed.
Discerning clients, as you brought up, like when you look at the development of cities, and I know part of our renaissance is a more regular acceptance of modernism, and it's tied to the desert and what we have here. Not that it all has to be that, but I think the more discerning our clients are, iron sharpens iron. I mean, a lot of times this is their fourth, fifth, sixth project, and they've had good experiences, and they've had experience otherwise, and they're a bit salty. So every time I have recently had some experiences with clients, and they made me better, and the project made me better. It's it's all linked.
Yeah. And the other thing too is there's great diversity in styles here. I mean,
Yeah.
and we're a firm that's been doing a little bit of everything. And the goal is always try to do something that is timeless and is good design and is a great experience for the client. But that's another thing I love about Phoenix. It doesn't all look the same. There's a lot of diversity and there's a lot of opportunities to do really whatever you want. But like you've always said, Brent, you want it to still feel like it belongs in Arizona in some manner, right?
But the other thing I was just going to add to that, I'm always kind of trying to be authentic. Now that might mean different things to me, being kind of a desert modernist, if you will. But when I think of, I mentioned somebody, a project I won't mention again, but back in the 80s and the 90s, if somebody did Spanish colonial, we called it Taco Bell Spanish. I mean, they just took some house plans and then threw a tile roof on it and put some arches in it or something.
We
now,
called it
Santa Barbara. and a lot of Tuscan was the same way. It was like they just took the Santa Barbara plans and then painted them ochre, and like threw some fake stone on it and called it. But just a second. But I look at the work that's being done, even though it's maybe a style that I don't try to work in styles myself. But when I look at the Spanish colonial or some of the things that are being done at Silverleaf and places like that, or just in Arcadia and so forth, the work that you're doing, Mark, there is an authenticity to it. I talk to architects who actually go out like George used to and actually go find an historic building in that style and actually take the office and go study it and understand the scale and the proportion and then try to recreate that, even though it's kind of not my thing, but I appreciate when I see the excellence and execution and thought that went into that and the level of detail.
George used to always say there's bad ochre, there's good ochre, and then there's mediocre.
That sounds like George.
Oh my gosh.
Down south, there's fried ochre.
Oh my gosh, you guys. Well, so I love what we're talking about with this Renaissance. And, CP, I'm remembering that back in 2004, we did a show house together. And at the time, it was one of the very first significant modern homes that I really was a part of. And in the very earliest of days, I remember thinking, are people going to like it? Remember 20 years ago when people were like, modern, is it going to sell? How's it going to do? And it's just interesting what the Renaissance has been with that. I mean, can you share a little bit about what was happening back then?
Well, that job in particular is funny. I was in design on another piece of property for this family, and I had presented it this day. The first, is the big one, with all the renderings and everything's done and boards are up. I had a 16-board presentation in their boardroom, and they loved it. And then after the meeting, their real estate agent called and said, hey, we found another property if you'd like to come look at it. So it was a house that burnt down in Paradise Valley, hillside. So we went and walked it, and it was fast and furious, and they wanted to maybe explore doing something speculative there. So, but modern. So I did a quick design like over the weekend, and then had another 8-board presentation or so, but the owners liked it so much they pulled the pin on the other project. So I designed myself out of a project. So that other one they abandoned and sold the lot, and they kept this one. So no good deed shall go unpunished. But they were fearless with their love of modern architecture, and the word elegant means a lot to me, and it's maybe not the hipster architect word, but it's always meant a lot. And I think elegance in living is something that's important to what I want to try to achieve. And I think it lines up with what you do, Renee. But that house, I hope, embodied some warmth and elegance. And I feel like when people entered it, they didn't know what to expect because it was modern, and people were eager to see it. But through that process, I talked to so many people that were warming up to the whole aspect of modern architecture because, you know, they thought that it had to be cold and primary colors and whatever was happening at that time. But it sort of crossed over that boundary, and it was, I think, a solid piece of modern desert relating architecture. So I thought it was pretty successful.
It was. It was very successful. People loved it. It was warm. The exterior had, that significant curve around the front, and I think that softened it as well. But I feel like that, started, at least in my world, started some of the conversation around some of the modern architecture and kind of thinking, there's more than one way to do it around here. So I want to go to something else here a little bit. So like a topic that I don't want to talk about. So a thing happened in 2020, and many of us, I'm going to say for sure me, I don't know about the three of you, but I think the three of you had a moment where you said, oh goodness, what's going to happen next here? And the thing that happened next was an absolute housing boom. People are renovating, building, expanding, all of this. And there were moments when we thought, well, is the bottom going to fall out? And then I feel like the exact opposite happened. And the three of you and your firms have been significantly very, very busy ever since then. Can you talk about what happened back in 2020? I want to talk about the state of the state. What's happening today?
I just remember because, I think we're probably all similar age, at least within 5 years of each other. I've been through many recessions here in the Valley, and the last one, there was no harder one than 2008, and it was brutal. And finally, come 2020, I finally got my firm up to kind of getting where I wanted it to be. I always wanted to be like a 5-man firm, and we at least had 3 men and 1 woman, and it felt really good, and we were doing some really great projects. And then when they started shutting everything down, I remember kind of that first phone call came in, and then a second phone call, and within 1 week we had 4 projects go on hold. And all my staff were like in their mid-20s at the time. They'd never been through anything like that. So I tried to kind of let them know, a little bit what was coming, and thinking that, we may have to tighten the reins a little bit. And then probably within 2 weeks, it seemed like the phone, and I use the term, metaphorically, because most people contact us through email or other means, it seems like, but the phone didn't stop ringing, and it literally went crazy. And we were just so busy. We got to a point where we were telling people we were 12 months out, and I was afraid to tell people that because I just figured they'd walk away, until I found out that they weren't walking away because everybody else was telling them that too. and we're still working on many of those projects now. So.
Yeah, that's one thing that we've noticed too. I mean, we had the same experience, but what we're noticing now is a lot of those projects, we finished in the last couple of years, and the builders are building them now, and they're still having shortages and problems, and it hasn't gotten, it's gotten maybe a little better, but it's still not anywhere close to being perfect. There's still a lot of issues with all kinds of materials. And then you got the labor shortage on top of it. So the two have really combined to create a problem that came from that robustness of 2020, 2021. We're building those houses right now, And so it was the same thing for us. When it first happened, I was like, okay, well, there it is. I've been waiting for this to come. I didn't know what it was going to be, because I lived through 2008 too. I don't know how, but I made it through. And I go, okay, I know what this is all about. I know what we're going to do. And it was just the complete opposite. And it was, I couldn't believe it. I think what happened was everyone rushes through life, and we're all just running in and out of our home and sleeping there for a few hours. And all of a sudden everyone was trapped in their home, and they were looking around and they go, we live in a piece of garbage here. we got to do something about this. So between remodeling or buying a lot, or they just woke up to the fact that we need to do something about the way we live. So that was the great thing about the whole pandemic, is that there was an awareness that I think has really taken off since then.
100%. I think people took inventory of their spaces, and I've found that people want to be more inventive with spaces. We call them like a Swiss Army space or whatever. So you have this changeling, loosely over the years, what terms you may call them, but sometimes we call them bonus rooms or
well, they were trapped with their kids on Zoom. I mean,
that's right.
Something had to be done.
That's right. But yeah, I think the interest in more innovative spaces and more personalized living, and actually, like I said already, but taking inventory of how you live and realizing that a home can make your life better, and it made us all more discerning and us better architects, because we were trapped in our homes too.
Yeah. I think, to me, what it really did is it instilled a sense of value for what we do that maybe wasn't there before, that people kind of took for granted. If you wanted to go someplace really nice, you left your average home and you went and stayed in some really nice resort or something like that. But now they had a greater sense of value for design. Design isn't, it's not the stone on the countertop. It's not, it's not the materials. It's not the things just that you see. It's the way that it's designed, the thoughtfulness of how people live in those bonus spaces, how they're designed so they can be 3 and 4 things, so they can be multi-generational, so they can change as your lifestyle changes. I think that people, I kind of said this before when we were talking about kind of the Renaissance thing and how people didn't used to make a personal investment in Arizona. I think people started seeing Arizona as a place where they want to live. I mean, I think we've talked about this before. We have many clients would tell us during our programming sessions what they wanted was a legacy home. Well, what's a legacy home? Well, what it meant to them and what it means to me is that's a home where we create a home for multi-generations, for our kids hopefully will enjoy our home when we're gone, and their kids will enjoy that home when they're gone. So they're putting down roots, and they're investing not in a 20-year home, but in a 50 or 100-year home. And that takes a different level of thought and quality and execution.
Yeah, until Joan Levinson comes in and walks someone off the street, says, we'll give you $18 million for the house you just built for $11 million, which just happened last week, by the way.
Which was a 7-year project.
Yeah, right? So, I mean, it's crazy what's been happening. And it's the flood of Californians. And, I think this market has just gone nuts.
I won't say what market I just got back on, but I just flew into town, and I didn't have a great experience in another city.
Say where it was.
Austin,
this is a
Texas.
podcast. Let's be controversial.
Austin, Texas. But I got home, and I said hello to Elizabeth here, and she said, how was it? And I said, we have to do everything in our power to let people know how wonderful our city is. We need to protect our city. We need, as designers, as architects, as publishers, as a voice, we got to protect this place.
Yeah, totally.
And this renaissance that we're having, this type of affiliation, I'm proud of what you guys are doing.
Well, vice versa. And what we need to do is we need to get the young people involved and part of this renaissance, because they're the next generation. Talk about legacies. I think it's up to us to do what George did for me and get young people in high schools and get them out there to see Rosenthal's shop and let them see another path,
But just the daylighting here. Yeah. The remarkable quality of life. I know it gets hot. It gets hot. Yeah. We're so blessed to live where we live, and I couldn't wait to come home, and I just feel so fortunate that we have the city, and this beautiful palette and landscape.
It's kind of funny. I remember a couple of years ago, it must have been 19 because it was pre-pandemic for sure. And I remember my wife and I, a number of years ago, found Portland and just thought Portland was this great place because it was like a third the size of San Francisco, had just as good restaurants, and was more funky. And it was an amazing place. But I just remember sitting down at Wilderness Brewery in downtown Phoenix after having walked to a number of places. That was something you never did in Phoenix before. Yeah. And seeing like street performers that weren't like paid by a developer. These were kind of, Times Square street performers. These are people, I just remember looking at my wife and saying, we used to fly to Portland to get this kind of funky, fun, interesting experience. And here it is in the middle of summer in downtown Phoenix, and we're having that experience. I mean, Phoenix has really just become a great place. So you're right. We need to protect it and make sure it doesn't evolve to become what unfortunately has happened to Portland and so many other cities we've talked about.
Well, and I love what CP, what you just said about we've got to protect our city. When I moved here in 1993, I remember a friend of mine said, "What are you doing going to Phoenix? It's a big vacant lot." I remember these exact words. And when I got here, I said, "Oh my goodness, it's a big vacant lot." And I remember coming here for opportunity, and I was excited to be here, but I wasn't in a position of thinking, oh, this is going to be the next great city. I had just rolled in from Chicago, which I thought was the great city, right? And so I didn't see what was going to become, but I knew I was excited to be here. And if you would have asked Renee in 1993, are you going to make this your home? Are you going to live here for another 30 years? Will you love this as your favorite city? I would have said, you've got to be kidding me. You've just got to be kidding. I mean, I'm here for a little bit until I go wherever I'm going to go, whatever I'm going to do. And people would say, what do you use for Christmas trees? Are they cactus? Like, do they do Christmas trees? And I mean, nobody even understood what was happening here in Phoenix and Arizona. I mean, on the East Coast, it was such a confusing place. They never knew what time it was. But fast forward to what's happening today, and I love what CP said about we've got to protect the city. We are sitting in one of the very most exciting cities of America. We are growing like gangbusters, but we are growing beautifully. And as I'm talking to people in other cities, my clients in New York, LA, Orange County, Chicago, all across it, I am extraordinarily proud of this incredible city that we are a part of. And who would have known back then what was going to come and where we would be today? And I think that these great cities need to be protected. And I think that great cities are built on, back to the topic of this podcast, great design and living beautifully. And it can't be a great city if we're just loaded up with a bunch of yucky, junky stuff, right? And so the three of you are making the city more beautiful, one building, one structure at a time.
At the beginning of this, you mentioned something about you're a junkie for great architecture and food.
I am.
Food and, food, wine, whatever, that's the other ingredient. I mean, when I think about, you can go to like 10 great restaurants in Gilbert, Arizona now. Yeah. I mean, Gilbert and Mesa and places that you never thought, like you thought, no, those only exist in Scottsdale and maybe cool parts of Phoenix. But now the valley has really matured, and I think it's a lot of it is that food and entertainment. I mean, you've got the Chris Biancos and people like that have just, elevated, raised the bar. I mean, they're raising the bar for food. How many James Beard Award winners do we have in Phoenix now?
Oh gosh, so many. And nominees. Yeah.
It's just remarkable. And so, yes, we need to protect this so nothing screws that up. And so when you look at those other places we talked about, unfortunately, so many of those great restaurants and that have moved out because they can't exist in those environments. So we need to do everything that we can to keep our environment, the way it is and keep evolving in a good way.
Yeah, I think it's up to us and the whole community, be it chefs, architects, designers, publishers. It's all of us collectively pushing this forward in a way that is positive and conducive to good living, good design. I think we just got to keep our eye on that ball and just don't let go, keep pushing it.
I think evidence of the strength that our design community has here, I'm getting more and more work out of state. We're working in 10 states right now, maybe, and I'm blessed that we have that, and I'm grateful. And that's not me saying, look what I'm doing. That's me saying our city is fetching work because we are becoming known as a design hotbed. And it's because of the work that everyone's doing and us pushing each other. And iron sharpens iron. We make each other better, and we keep pushing and keep pushing. And I think as our design community evolves, this is going to be something that comes more and more profound for us.
I agree. Totally.
Absolutely. Well, and as I travel, people ask me about what's happening in Phoenix, what's happening in Scottsdale, what's happening in Gilbert, what's happening in Arizona. And so I think that we have an enormous blessing to be where we are and to be doing what we're doing today. So I want to wrap up this podcast because, first of all, I'm super inspired by what I'm hearing, because all I want to do is just keep publishing and more architecture all the time, right? But I want to, I just want to go back to, the roots of what we're doing at Iconic Life magazine. And what do you feel like is iconic about our city?
One thing I love about our city is how clean it is. I mean, you drive around the freeways, you drive around the whole city. I mean, it's just a beautiful city. And it's like you guys were saying, we got to protect this.
100%.
Because I go to other cities and it's not the same experience.
That's one of the main things.
Right?
When I came here straight from college, that resonated with me like nothing.
Yeah.
It's
beautiful.
It's remarkable.
Yep. So I think that's one of the things.
You mentioned cleanliness. I think it's the art, the appreciation for art as well. Every city here has a percent for the arts. So when you talk about driving around, you drive around Chicago and you see, rusted iron bridges that are crumbling down and concrete and that sort of thing. You drive around here, the freeways are beautiful here. I mean, they actually,
the bus stops are beautiful.
The bus stops are, because they spend, 0.5%, which is a big number on public works, on the art. So there's a natural appreciation for it. But, if I have to think of the most iconic thing, it probably is lifestyle, but you mentioned kind of like the daylight here and so forth. I mean, I always go back, what is the most abundant thing that we have here? And it's sunshine. And so how do you use that? How do you incorporate that into your design and so forth? I was up this morning at one of our projects at 7:30 in the morning. We got there because the light was going to be nice. I wanted to take some photography. I wanted to get Camelback Mountain when it had kind of the fissures and so forth all shadowed in. And it was just it's such a remarkable, the mornings in Arizona are just spectacular, as are the evenings. I mean, give me a sunrise and a sunset in Arizona over any place.
I have a New York client right now, and they were in town visiting, and one of the things she said is, "Oh, you Arizona people. I guess everyone's up at 5:30, walking around, happy to be alive."
I'm usually walking by Brent's house at 5:30 in the morning.
It's just it was a really unique perspective from her. But I think, Renee, for me, I spent a lot of my life in the South and on the East Coast. Our landscape just resonates so much with me, and I've already said the daylighting, but the topography,
it's sculptural.
It is 100%, and it's something to say iconic for us to borrow from, and for that to inform our architecture is amazing.
Yeah,
because it's unique.
It's almost a surreal environment that we get to plant architecture into. Yep. You know what I'm saying? The whole thing is just this great artistic canvas that we get to paint with every house and project that we do.
It really is. So I did not pre-prepare for this question, by the way, but as everybody's talking about sunrise and sunset and mountains, as I was driving over to this podcast, I was coming down Chaparral. As I'm coming down Chaparral, I'm seeing this incredible, I mean, it's just like Camelback Mountain just kind of just rose out of Scottsdale Road, right? It's just like a pyramid. It's just so close. It's so touchable. And I think about, Brett, the project that you're talking about, like I know what Camelback Mountain looks like from there. I know what Camelback Mountain looks like from Mark's backyard. I know what Camelback Mountain looks like from going down Scottsdale Road. I know what it looks like from your roof deck, from CP and Elizabeth's roof deck. I know what it looks like from the Royal Palms. I know what it looks like from so many different perspectives. And it's interesting, coming, west? I'm terribly directionally challenged. When you're coming west on Camelback Road, I know what it looks like. And that was my first vision ever in 1993 of what Camelback Mountain looked like. And every time I'm going that direction, I remember it. But it's interesting, just that one mountain, the number of perspectives that you can get on it. And it just rises out of kind of like nothing. And the different time of day. And then it changes colors and then it gets foggy. But it's got this beautiful thing where you start, you're driving around one of the largest cities in America, but there's the big, huge mountain right smack in the middle of it. And it's beautiful. And it reminds you of nature and that you're not in a concrete jungle. The biggest landmark that we see in almost every direction as we are driving around is this big, huge, beautiful, iconic mountain. And I think that's really incredible. And I think that sort of speaks to what everybody's been talking about here about the topography and the landscape and the inspiration of living in a place like this.
I was just going to give some credit to like John Driggs. I mean, you have people that, were kind of forefathers of this valley that created the mountain preserve. I mean, Camelback Mountain is just one of something like 9 mountains in the mountain preserve. So, I was last week. I went and visited a friend who was staying at an Airbnb from Chicago. We're staying at an Airbnb on the side of Piestewa Peak in that area. Kind of the Sunny Slope area, and it's remarkable. It's like and it doesn't even matter. I mean, there are really wealthy areas and there are areas that aren't so wealthy, but everybody has an ability to the mountains belong to everybody.
But beauty abounds everywhere.
That was kind of part of the whole mountain preserve thing, was that the mountains belong to the people. That's why we're always frustrated as architects, because we have all these rules we have to follow when we design homes on mountains. But the root of all of those rules is to keep the mountain beautiful for everyone to enjoy. And I very much appreciate that about
There's
Phoenix.
A couple we need to modify, but I agree with you.
I agree. I think you'll get a agreement from all of us here.
Oh my gosh. What is your, I'm going to wrap this up. What is your wish for our city over the next 20 years?
For our city, I'd say even for our community, is just that what CP said is just let's fight to keep it great. Let's just do everything we can to keep this great. That's what we got to do.
Naturally cities sort of grow out, they sprawl, then they start consolidating, and then they develop cultural centers.
I think we're at the consolidation stage, don't you?
And I think, and we have some cultural centers beginning.
Yeah.
And we all need to be mindful of what those are when we need to invest in them and direct them and make sure that it's done with positivity and for permanence.
Yeah, and when I look around Phoenix, Scottsdale, even Old Town, I don't want to pick on Old Town too much, but the opportunities in this consolidation are enormous. I mean, there's still so much vacant land. When you drive around central Phoenix, it's amazing how much just empty lots there are still. And just the opportunities between Scottsdale and Tempe and all these areas that can be infilled in such a way that make this city even, more spectacular.
Yeah. I hope that the citizens here make it a point to stay and be informed, and what you do, Renee, you inform. So your role is so important with what we can and will do in the future.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, I love the opportunity to be part of this conversation, to listen to the three of you, but also to get to engage at this level. And I agree with all three of you that really we are in an amazing city, and this is our responsibility to live beautifully right here. Thanks for joining me for Iconic Hour. I hope you're feeling inspired to live beautifully. For more iconic content, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Your Iconic Life. And check out our website, iconiclife.com, for fresh new content published daily.